Hello, everyone. Welcome to the sixth edition of Mind Debates. As we promised in the fourth one, we tried to get more of these soon. So we're back in 2 weeks with another invigorating, I hope, invigorating debate. Together, I'm joined by, from Mindmakers team, I'm joined by Pramod Kumar Buravalli. Sadly, Sunanda could not make it to this time's debate. And we're extremely pleased to be joined by Dhruva Jaishankar from the German Marshall Fund of United States. He's a strategic affairs analyst and a transatlantic fellow with the GMF US. Dhruv, if you don't mind, I'm going to use the term GMF US throughout the hangout. With a focus on Asia, and then he writes extensive about South Asian policy, strategic affairs, and so forth. So Dhruv, welcome to the Mind Debates.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great pleasure to have you. So I'm gonna give the first round to Pramod. He wanted to if you just give a brief overview about Mindmakers, 10 seconds, and then I'm gonna jump straight into the debate.
Well, this is for Dhruv and also for our viewers. And Mindmakers is a new startup, a media portal that began about 8-9 months ago. The first article that showed up was basically about President Obama's visit to India during the Republic Day parade in 2015. So since then, we've been trying to cover a lot of issues, both strategic, spiritual, a lot of politics, both on the Indian side, and a little bit we are edging towards covering Indo-American politics as well. Try to be as broad-based as possible. Our signature podcast series is broadcast every weekend, and we hope this debate with Dhruva Jaishankar will be the kind of the harbinger of many more to come. And we welcome you on the debate today.
Thank you.
Yeah. So to kick things off, this week we saw a very interesting visit. I call it interesting because finally we had an Indian Prime Minister who went to the West Coast. It was probably the first Prime Minister after Jawaharlal Nehru. I think Indira Gandhi did go to the West Coast in LA. So what do you think about that? The optics of it.
No, I mean overall, I think it was an excellent visit. I mean, I think this was his second trip in 2 years to the U.S. He had previously gone to New York and Washington. I think it was only natural that he would make the Bay Area, San Francisco, and the Bay Area the destination for his second visit. One, it has a large Indian American population. I mean that's all quite clear. Two, it also addressed in some ways another one of his prime agendas, Digital India, and of course we saw in some ways a very packed schedule. I was in New York for that leg of his visit, and I mean one of the things you just see when you observe closely is how busy his agenda is from morning. 9 o'clock in the morning to night, every hour there's another meeting or so. And for somebody who's pressed for time like the Prime Minister is, I think it's quite significant to see who he meets with. It's not random. There's a certain logic that goes that is behind every meeting and every appointment that he makes. So I think we saw a very busy schedule for him, both in New York and in the Bay Area, which is I think only to be expected.
This visit, did you happen to see any connections? I know that you said that there are a lot of meetings. Digital India with the kind of foreign policy that he's had about 37 visits already in 16 months.
Yes.
What did you see in the visit to the Silicon Valley? Any specific connectivity?
So there were multiple dimensions to it. I mean, one was obviously there was a big tech dimension, so that included the bilateral meetings with various CEOs. Apple, Facebook. He did that event, of course, with a number of CEOs who were present on the stage. We shared the stage with Microsoft, Google. You also saw him, naturally, a big emphasis on startups, big emphasis on climate, renewable sustainability, both in New York and in California. That's going to be something we're going to see a lot over the next 2 months in the lead up to the Paris Climate Summit. It also happens to be an issue that I think is dear to the Prime Minister's heart. So that was another set of issues. There was, of course, the diaspora angle. And then in New York, less in California, there was, of course, an explicitly business finance angle. In particular, he met with the head of JP Morgan Chase, with the US CEOs, including, and a lot of the CEOs who are very invested in the relationship with India, Pepsi, MasterCard. etc. And of course, and also media heads. I mean, it was quite interesting that he met with Rupert Murdoch, amongst other heads of media organizations. So there was a business angle to it, there was a tech angle to it, there was a climate angle to it, and then in New York again there was a bilateral, there was a diaspora angle, of course, and then there was also bilateral meetings with other heads of government and state who happened to be there for the UN meeting. A big emphasis on West Asia, Palestine, Egypt, Jordan. He met with the President of Mexico, Prime Minister of Sweden, but also certain key countries. I think the region, of course, Sri Lanka. You saw I had a meeting with Sirisena. So, and of course, U.S., Britain, France. So again, some big meetings there.
Yeah, I guess we weren't able to cover the entire gamut of the meetings in one segment itself. It's that many meetings.
Yes.
But what it brought about climate brings up to an interesting point that he raised in the UN General Assembly address, where he talked about a term called climate justice, which I thought was quite interesting. You know, that if some country XYZ or something makes a mess, they're supposed to clean it up as well. And especially with the narrative about climate change that is being pushed in US media, you know, especially in some of the commentators that I would say represent the left of center in United States. You know, talking. So this is a very significant comment in that view. So how do you view that?
Yeah, no, I mean, justice in some ways is all-encompassing, no? So one of the issues that is one of the big problems in the climate discussion is that should the developed economies do more? I mean, do they have a greater responsibility because of past emissions that they have done? They've benefited from industrialization, and should countries that are on the lower, you know, farther down on the development path, India included, India is arguably the biggest economy that is sort of low income and is developing rapidly now. Does India need to bear the same burdens? And there's a justice element to that too. I mean, why should India, that hasn't benefited from industrialization, be hobbled in its quest for for people having a better life? And so there's this sort of justice and equality element there. Now, I mean, one way around this is to say that there is a differentiated responsibility. I think the Prime Minister made that clear. But also that India is not going to do the exact same thing that the industrialized economies have. And he keeps on emphasizing India's commitments that have already been made publicly to the renewable sector. And 175 gigawatts, this is massive. I mean, this will really open up opportunities. I think it's 175 gigawatts by 2022. So in the next 6 years, you're going to see, I mean, if to meet those targets, if that's correct, will mean massive investments. I mean, we're talking billions, millions of dollars on a scale that has been
never seen before.
Never seen before.
Right,
exactly.
Right. And this is very interesting because there was his speech or his stance, and then there was the Chinese president's stance, Xi Jinping's stance. So there was a little kind of I wouldn't even say dichotomy because it's too big a word, but a slight difference in their stance. But I would like to promote just 1 second before I come to you on that.
My inference from the climate justice is that a country that has been, I would say, at the forefront of industrialization has always been China more than India. At least at this point in time, the manufacturing sector does not exist in India in comparison to China. So why this apprehension? Why this call for climate justice when all you're doing is your forte is services sector? It will take a lot of years for you to really come to a point where a substantial portion of your population is going to be engaged in manufacturing. So I'm not able to place two and two together with respect to Narendra Modi's give and take that he basically that is his forte. Why now? I mean, what point? Yeah.
I mean, I think in some ways we are going to see in the next few months in the lead up to the Paris Climate Summit a lot of some might say pressure placed on India. And India is the only major emitter that has not publicly declared it's in some ways it's voluntary commitments to the. You're going to see in some ways the European countries and the US to some degree put a lot of pressure on India in some ways to make a much more conservative. For example, do what China has done and set a year for peak emissions. Now, I don't think anybody in India, they'll make the argument that India hasn't industrialized as much as China. Right. China can afford to make that kind of, and even that is not a non-binding commitment, but China can afford to make that kind of commitment. India can't quite yet. And so it's sort of unfair to do that. Now, instead, to make I think what you're seeing the Prime Minister do is make this into a positive story, saying, look, maybe we can't make those kind of commitments yet, but we're not going to make the same mistakes as all of you, and we're going to emphasize, I think, the renewables and a more sustainable development path.
Yeah, maybe you're right. China maybe can afford to make that thing and can afford to even remain a little ambiguous on its stance.
Yeah.
So definitely. And then, coming to that, there was another significant thing, and we'll talk about the UN Security Council deals coming next. But before that, I also wanted to discuss about G4. So after a long time, we saw. I mean, revival
after
is
10 years. After 10 years, they met.
Yeah. So maybe revival is the word then. The revival of G4, and on this scale, and G4 is this unique setup where India is leading the the discussions and so forth. And this time, it wasn't just the foreign ministers or it wasn't just the external affairs department. It was on the prime ministerial level. And also we are having Angela Merkel's bilateral visit to India, which is going to happen this week. So in that way, G4 is pretty significant, that India does not have the same stake in it, say, as in BRICS, where BRICS is the junior fiddle, plays the junior fiddle to the whims of China, so to say. So how do you view that that step?
No, I think that there's some important differences and some important similarities between the two entities. The difference, of course, is BRICS actually is now evolved into something much larger. There's a BRICS bank, there's an annual summit. The G4 has a very specific purpose, which is to actually reform the UN Security Council system, which all four countries agree is unfair. So that gets to the question of UN reform, and I mean, I personally don't think it's that big a priority. I think a window had opened in the last few weeks and months in the UN, which is why there was this big push suddenly to do something about UN reform. But I'm not sure, honestly, I think it's part of a long-term process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, because there's going to be a lot of resistance from the vested interests, particularly the P5, who each have their own concerns about UN reform, different concerns about UN reform.
Sorry, go on.
Go ahead. No, please go ahead.
No, what I was saying was there are inherent contradictions within how the P5 view each member of the G4. So you have a unique case where Russia and China might not be too favorable to Japan being included on the table. India, China may have a certain concern, but the other four certainly don't have a problem with India. Germany, China, Pramod thinks China has a bigger concern with India, and maybe to some extent United States as well. So he's vociferously denying with my claim. So I'm going to let him rebut me.
Everybody has a problem. In fact, the next segue to the kind of G4 to the latest push by India to try to garner a little bit more, support for the permanent, for the permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council. I don't think that step was necessary at this point in time, because we don't have enough leverage. There's no way, unless 3 out of these 5 countries really root for you and want to get you in, that's going to happen. So, when you're counting at this point in time.
I think there was a small thing. Dhruv, he'll probably join in again. So, no, I agree with you on that point, that maybe we don't have that leverage right now, but wonder when that.
No, I don't think India should seek the United Nations Security Council, the permanent membership so aggressively like what they've been trying. So again, we'll have to wait for Dhruv to kind of see what kind of strategy that is. But also India should not appear to be running from pillar to post between BRICS and G4, and then all of a sudden try to win. Be in the good books of these 3 Western nations also, Britain, France, and the United States.
I agree. But I don't know what's the way forward.
Yeah.
So that's the interesting.
I think also waiting for Dhruv. Hi.
I'm sorry, I had some technical problems.
We went on because we were basically, at least my position was in a previous discussion, was that India should not be seen as Oliver Twist, asking for more. Keep asking to be included when you have no leverage. You talk about 185,000 troops that you've ever deployed, but you actually get paid for it. Number one.
Yes, yes.
So there's not enough of international
but my thing was
involvement. Let me finish. There's not enough involvement by India, and there was another subsequent topic that I wanted to engage in terms of India's foreign policy, not being a very nonchalant foreign policy. You've not seen even when Rohingyas are fleeing Myanmar, and there was this whole hue and cry as to what India was doing in its own neighborhood. So I don't think the time has come for India to knock at anybody's doorstep. So, but what are your thoughts, Dhruv? You're right
before you come in, just wanted to add one point to it, just kind of an additional, so you can address both the questions. So I'm unlike Pramod, my position is similar to yours. If it happens, it's okay. If it doesn't happen, it's fine. It's not a be-all, end-all deal.
Yes.
But I find this concept of veto pretty, archaic and stuff. That 5 countries have the veto to the other 195. Although I do acknowledge that if India ever were to get a permanent seat at the UNSC, I don't think it's going to get a veto. So that's kind of the contradiction. I mean, but I'll let you respond to that, and then we'll take the debate further.
No, I think you're correct. I mean, I think that's not something that's been fully thought through, which is even if there is an expansion of the permanent members of the UNSC, would it necessarily, would they all get veto power? And then if not, would India be willing to accept effectively second-class status on a reformed UNSC? Right. So I think there are a lot of complications there. Now, one thing where there is a similarity coming back to between the BRICS and G4 is in some ways both of them are in some ways I want to say cries for attention, but that's maybe not the right word. But basically, what they're signaling is that there's a new world. There's a new world order. I mean, arguably, the G4 plus the US and China is a more representative of the new international order, of the power dynamics in the new international order than the current P5. And in some ways, BRICS was also, a lot of people dismissed it initially. They said it was just an acronym coined by somebody at Goldman Sachs. It's not, but now it actually has a bank. It has some financial backing. They now have a headquarters. They have a new. So again, I mean, I think this is in some ways a signal to the other powers that there's it's a statement of intent. I think that might be a better way of putting it.
On a lighter note, now that it has a bank, it may as well be coined by Goldman Sachs.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
So that was one bit on the BRICS. So it's weird. So I mean, it's a weird relationship in both different things. BRICS is maybe more of an economic engagement, and G4 is more of a strategic engagement. But again, not on a larger level, just on a issue-based level.
So the BRICS is a search for a new global currency, Adit.
Is that the skeptic in you saying? Or
No. That I actually put words in Dhruv's mouth. He said statement of intent. I said something else.
but that might be too big of an intent. But let's see how that proceeds. But staying in New York before we jump onto the 5-hour flight to San Francisco, because I'm very eager to discuss about Digital India and how it views. But then after they came back from San Francisco, there was also a mini bilateral, I would say, between Obama and Modi. So this is a very interesting, I wouldn't even say arrangement, but a very interesting scenario where they have met with each other almost thrice in a year, when Obama went to US, and then last year when Narendra Modi came to India. So do you see the US-India relationship going to a different level? Because during George Bush's time, it was probably at its highest that it's ever been before, and to some extent during the later Clinton years, but I would say more during the Bush years than during the Clinton years. So, and after 2007-8, it kind of took a nosedive till it picked back up last year. So how do you view that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were to look back, we would say between, until 2008, I think there was a very close level of cooperation. It's been a slightly more bumpy road since then, but I think we've seen, I mean, now it's at a different level altogether. And you see there were talks in Washington before the Prime Minister came, led by the Foreign Minister, by Mrs. Sushma Swaraj. And I mean, if you look again at the agenda, it is much deeper and broader than one would have even thought imaginable. We're seeing, I mean, I think two areas particularly where to look at quite closely. One is defense. 10 years ago, I remember when I moved to Washington, people were talking, the defense trade was a distant prospect. Now, today, you're seeing, I mean, they just approved the helicopter deal.
The Chinook and Apache deal.
You can look at a party deal. And now, if you look, the US is now the second largest supplier of defense equipment to India after Russia. And growing, its share is growing. And India, strangely enough, India is now the second largest destination for US defense exports after Saudi Arabia. Again, this would have been unimaginable 10 years ago. So I think defense is one area which is, we're seeing it's fitful. There are a lot of problems. Every negotiation is taking a lot of time. But you're seeing, in some ways, a very steady progress towards a much closer defense partnership, and not just on defense trade, than I think a lot of people had imagined. So that's one area I think that's very positive. Now, I think we're going to see some negative areas as well. I think trade is one issue. There was just an article in Foreign Policy yesterday that hinted at some of the problems in the US-India trade relationship. So I think we're going to see some bumps on the road. But there's no question that it's a much deeper and much broader relationship. And the two sides are talking about much more frankly about a very wide range of issues than I think they've ever had in the past, even during the Bush years.
Yeah. So what is interesting is, and I'm going to bring in Pramod on this one, that I think two aspects are pretty significant. That as long as there is no economic or defense engagement on a larger scale is difficult to imagine between India and US. So you took that defense part is done, and it's a strategic shift because even Russia started supplying arms to Pakistan. Is what we saw. So it was kind of because first it was assumed that Russia would get supplied to India and US to Pakistan.
But one thing there actually is, even that is questionable because somebody has to pay for it. No, the US defense relationship with Pakistan was still largely aid based. Right. And Russia is being motivated by it's an economic motive.
Yes. So motivated by blank, we'll leave it at that.
But sorry. So just something to keep in mind,
No, definitely. So it'll be kind of a hilarious situation if they use the US aid to pay Russia for their arms.
Well, we'll see, the US aid is winding down actually quite rapidly. So
quite rapidly.
Another discussion to be had on this, but I think the US-Pakistan relationship is changing.
Although the funniest would be if Pakistan were to approach Israel for arms, but then
I think on one note, and I'm going to go back to that article on foreign policy, and that is what I want us to lead into. On one hand, the Indian economy is growing, which means your defense sector acquisition, and a lot had to be done 10 years during Manmohan Singh's government. A lot were not signed. A lot of the Air Force is woefully inadequate. It's probably at its lowest quadrant strength right now. So there's a lot more to acquire and also build indigenously. So the market itself is large to involve Russia, Great Britain, the United States, and also Israel. So one of the things that I want you to talk about today is your foreign policy article in which you talked about land acquisition, you talked about GST and the stagnation therein of some of the reforms, and kind of tie into what frustrations you are seeing in, especially in Washington D.C. and New York with the general investor community. Are they? How are they really concerned with the land acquisition? Are they looking to acquire land, acres and acres of land, or just for the layman, how would you try to tie these things in?
No, some of these things are really markers of intent more than anything else. Look, if GST and land acquisition had passed Parliament, Modi would have been on the cover of every business magazine in the West as the great reformer, as the Deng Xiaoping of India. Again, it didn't pass, and I think there was disappointment in Delhi, of course. Now, one of the things, I've become a bit skeptical of taking public, gauging sentiment based on reading the newspapers and then the media in India. That's been quite in the last few months we've seen that become slightly more pessimistic. But again, Pew just released some public opinion surveys. They found an 87% approval rate for the Prime Minister. So huge. We'll have to see what happens in the Bihar elections because that'll be another test of it. But public opinion still seems to be pretty strongly, pretty optimistic, not just about the government, but about the economy more broadly and about the future prospects of the economy. So I think that's a very good sign. We just saw just today investment figures the FT Financial Times published, which are, that suggests a 250% increase in FDI. So all of that I think is quite positive, and I'm not sure whether we should let the fact that you have some people who are still very skeptical in India, who are still dominating the media narrative in some ways. Now, what you're seeing I feel in Washington and New York to some degree is some of that pessimism in India filtering over slowly to the US. So people who are visiting India from once or twice a year are going there and saying, all these grand plans that the PM had for revolutionizing the Indian economy, that's not really being borne out. Look at all these things that are not happening.
Right.
Now, again, some of it practically will make very little difference. I mean, I think on land and labor, we're seeing some of this kicked down to the state level. Rajasthan, in some ways, we will see what happens in Rajasthan in particular. But I mean, some of the states are actually taking the initiative on some of this. GST, I suspect, will happen. It's been delayed, but I suspect it's only a matter of time before that happens.
No, and today you saw a big rate cut from the RBI.
Yes, exactly. That's another thing.
Then how that transpires, what Arun Jaitley does with that also remains to be seen. What is interesting is also, and probably a lot of investors and other people will be looking closely, is what if the result goes against the BJP in the Bihar elections? Will the Prime Minister brazen it out and go for complete reforms, or are they going to approach?
But I don't. Here's one thing, Dhruv, I don't understand, and I need your thoughts on this. Is reform is not something that is basically a law that gets passed and something happens almost immediately. It's an ongoing thing. It's a constant process. Be it land acquisition. I thought it was a wrong move to take it up at the federal level. It should have been taken up at the state level. So what is your take on that? Why this whole narrative that?
To add on to that, what Pramod said was something that Indians we also set too much store by the laws. Implementation is a major component of law. Even if it passes to the parliament, will the implementation be such at state level? Because it goes through the same bureaucracy. So even this is the same question that a lot of people had for Digital India. That Digital India seems to be an excellent thing, but will it go down through the bureaucracy? Will the ease of doing business improve in India?
Yes, no, I mean, all of these are big questions with no clear answers, and I mean, so there's a concern. So I've heard both things. No, I mean, there's a sense that if the Bihar elections go against the BJP, then there'll be less to lose. Maybe there'll be a big push on various areas of the domestic agenda. I've heard the opposite also, that it'll be a vindication, and the vindication will lead to a big push. But so you can read it either way. I don't know. I mean, one of the problems, I think we put a lot of stock, and I mean, this is part of the new media environment. We put a lot of stock on every major election. Once Bihar is done, there'll be another round of elections later this year, early next year in Tamil Nadu, Assam, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu. So, I mean, we can't let every election be a referendum of the government at the national level. I mean, sometimes as well. So maybe we put a little bit too much stock on all of this. In terms of reforms, you're right. It's a long-term process. 1 or 2 laws is not going to change anything. I mean, I do think it's significant that it, in terms of the signal it sends to investors abroad, that you're serious about it. Now, so going back to your earlier question, I mean, in New York, all the people who met with the Prime Minister seemed pleased when they came out of their meetings. They said they were confident, they said the right things. Now, it's hard to gauge whether some of this is just what they say in front of the TV cameras and how much of this is a real sentiment. And ultimately, the big test will be whether they actually put money where their mouth is. So far, we have still seen American companies being a little bit more cautious. I mean, I think some of the Asian conglomerates have decided to, that they can take that risk and they can make a long-term investment in India. But they're less I mean, I feel American companies, by and large, are more sensitive to shareholder sentiment. So if something goes wrong in the next 6 months or something like that, they get skittish and have we really made a good investment in India? They're less likely to make these big bets. So I mean that's just my impression.
No, and even if the entrepreneurs are setting store by the media narrative, that could be a little unstable also, because the media narrative has jumped on from like 5 different angles. And it
tends to be, it goes up very high, it goes very low. One day Modi's on top of the world, the next day day he's
No,
not.
last year you had this amazing thing about this church attacks and whatnot being done in the media, and that is completely gone. Once it was rebuffed by so many people and so forth. So it's quite the media narrative has jumped all over the place as well. So but coming back to this investment thing, I personally see a lot of scope to to be made in infrastructure investment and so forth, and that seems to be coming from Japan. But so from whether it comes from US or not, and US has a big, I think it can provide a lot when it comes to investment on that infrastructure side, especially on the railways and on the roadway side, the sector as well. So let's see how that comes up. But Pramod wanted to make a point on that, so I'm going to.
I think Adit-san hit it right on the nail. I called him Adit-san because he has a big hangover on Japan. And, now with the Abe government having gone through a little bit of ripples with the change in the constitution, a little bit of opposition, I think, with the pacifist communities that are always there to oppose. So what do you think? Is that a very big area where India can fill in the vacuum that United States might be at this point in time, looking into sort of a withdrawal symptoms from Japan in terms of security? Are you looking at that way, or?
Yeah, I'm actually, I'm going to be spending some time in the next few months looking at the India-Japan defense relationship in particular. And
so this can be an abstract to your paper.
Yes, no, exactly. No, I mean the larger point. I don't think, honestly, I don't think India is a replacement for the U.S. The U.S.-Japan alliance is very unique. It really is. It's a mutual defense partnership. The U.S. has enormous amounts of investments there. They have troops there, they have bases there, and there's no way that India can replace the US in that. Now, all India does is it gives Japan options as security partners. India does, Australia does, some of the Southeast Asian countries do, and India is quite unique for a number of reasons. One, I think it allows Japan to do military exercises outside the Pacific. And so the pre-maritime exercises we're seeing now in the Indian Ocean, it sort of pulls Japan out and helps to make Japan more into a global security actor. So that's one area where India's value is is quite high. The second is, again, there's still negotiations underway, but whether there's joint defense production between India and Japan. And that would be a big step because, again, Japan has traditionally been quite reticent and reluctant to engage in joint defense collaboration and arms exports. And so the discussions underway are really to involve this particular plane, which is an amphibious plane, or a seaplane, a US-2, and whether the Japanese and India can jointly manufacture that in India, not just for the Indian market, but actually for third countries as well. And that would again be a big step for Japan. It would be if that were to happen, it would be quite significant. So that's where India's value is. It does give Japan options.
And there is also that corridor, Pramod, that Japan was planning to build that goes from the north to the east, if I'm not mistaken. The road corridor, Dhruv, if I'm.
There were plans for that. The Japanese were interested in that. I think the plans that will probably take off most, although it's still quite early stages, is the BCIM corridor. But that's a China. Yeah, so they might be, but that's a Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar. But the Japanese have been invested in basically improving connectivity between India and Southeast Asia. They've long expressed an interest.
And that's on a lighter note. I think we are going to see a lot of fireworks in the South China Sea because there's this, and then there is also this engagement that Pranab Mukherjee Sushma Swaraj went to Vietnam. So that also needs to be looked at. But coming to now, we've spent enough time in New York, Pramod. So coming to San Francisco, and since you are an entrepreneur yourself, what do you think Digital India means for you? Kind of open the debate, and then I'm going to bring Dhruv in on that.
I think Digital India should basically concentrate on a lot of government support. I have a small IT consulting company in India, and none of my revenue comes from within India. There's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape. There's no transparency in or visibility in where these government projects are. Nobody knows if there are projects I can bid on, or the kind of long sales life cycle I have to go through. So that is where I think the first seed should be laid in terms of automating several of these government projects, which is basically where the low level corruption comes from. If you have these projects that are online, have 25% of the projects bid by women-owned enterprises. I don't know how you classify minority-owned businesses in India. That's a very minefield there. But at least having a central architecture, having a CIO in place is must and should. I don't know who his information technology advisor is. Unless you start encouraging smaller technology companies to experiment, and the government itself becomes its biggest customer for these companies, there is no way you can spur that kind of innovation cycle. You need revenue to sustained revenue to be able to invest a little bit into research and development. I don't know, Dhruv, what is your take? What is the practical
to add on to that, there is also the aspect of innovation, which comes with research and development. That Digital India, that should be, unless and until you are able to produce in India, you say make in India or something, but produce something significant in India, Digital India will not be as successful as that. That should lead on to that. So yeah.
I have two articles on this actually. One in Foreign Policy that came out a few days ago,
and you wrote a fine piece on Digital India. Yeah,
and then actually one just that came out. It will actually be tomorrow in the Indian Express as well on a different aspect of it. But I mean, so broadly, I think one of the problems that this government is having is they have these very nice slogans. Make in India, Digital India, Swachh Bharat, but what that actually translating those into policies has proven a little bit more difficult. At least explaining to the public what they have in mind. So I mean, as I see it, Digital India, if you go through all the documents that have been produced, really has three components. One is basically expanding access to digital tools online, various digital tools, and this has, of course, implications for education, for a whole number of things. But access is a big element of that. The second is e-governance, basically improving governance, cutting out corruption, etc., using technological tools. And the third is electronics manufacturing, which is where it overlaps with Make in India. And so those are, as I see it, the three legs of what Digital India. Now, when the Prime Minister went to Silicon Valley, his big emphasis was really on the first aspect of it. If you see the agreements that were publicly announced, at least, they're mostly related to access. So, Google decided to, publicly said we're going to set up railway stations, we'll have Wi-Fi in railway stations. Yeah. Microsoft said we're going to connect 500,000 villages. Facebook is the interesting one, because what Facebook has done is basically said we're going to create a free app, meaning it's not just free, but it's free to get data on that app. And we're going to enter into agreements with certain providers for this. Now, this is going to face some resistance. There's already a bit of a hue and cry in India from certain activists, NGOs, and actually small entrepreneurs as well, who basically say that they're going to be disadvantaged by this. And so I think we're going to see a bit of tension here. But I think the Prime Minister has made it clear that access is the top priority.
See, but where I think the biggest challenge will be is that in India, infrastructure, building internet infrastructure is a major key, and when all these companies come in, that's going to be a sort of an investment, so
bandwidth is going to be the big problem. Power, just having enough electricity is going to be a problem.
Right. So
not just that, Dhruv. What language are you going to communicate?
Yeah, language is
vernacular.
Absolutely.
I mean, you have to invent a altogether different vernacular keyboard for each of the single language.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, that's also hindered actually market access, because you can have content, you can have it even in English and Hindi, but that still you don't have local language content in a lot of applications. So that's another issue. I mean, one of the things. I mean, this is another news item. I think Times of India had a story a few days ago. This is interesting. I think English medium education in schools doubled in the last 5 years. It doubled in the last 5 years in India.
Right.
So I mean, it's significant. I mean, and actually the places where it's growing the most is in the Hindi belt. Strangely enough, it's in Bihar and UP.
Yeah. No, but you also have this, the reason why English knowledge has also become important is you also have this call center jobs and stuff like that that a lot of kids are applying
Yes,
for
yes, yeah.
after school. And for that, English is a major
But
requirement.
that's still such a small. I mean, look, call centers employ,
No, no,
1
but
million,
I
2
was just
million
giving
people.
one
It's
example, but
no,
there's
no,
like multiple facets to that. Yeah.
yes, yes,
So,
yeah.
and this is just one. So, depending on the cities, you have various localized factors which are leading into this. But so the companies, who will be forced to develop certain infrastructure in India, would there be enough incentive for them to invest in India? That once they spend that on that infrastructure, are they going to get enough? To use a layman's word, are they going to get enough bang for their buck?
I mean, that's a question, no? So on the one hand, India is already the second largest user base for most of these companies because China has basically kept them out. So, Facebook's second largest number of users is India. Google, the second largest number of searches is India. Even what's it called? Uber, the second largest number of users is India. I mean, so India is effectively already the second largest market, and that's before you still have to get 800 million people online. So it's still hugely untapped.
It's poised
Now,
to be the largest.
but monetization is a problem, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at the revenue that advertising revenue that Google gets from India, it's a fraction, it's a tiny fraction of what it gets in the US. So I mean, I think you're right. The big question is, even if they have this access, will it be able to translate into actual gains? And I think that's an open question.
Yeah, because in infrastructure you see the government tried to make a push, but then they had to kind of recalibrate their strategy and do a public-private model. Now I hope they don't have to do something like that in digitization.
Well, I mean, here effectively the tech companies, India is such a big market that they're paying upfront. They're willing to take the risk. I mean, effectively that's what was most of these big companies indicated when the PM went, was they're willing to take that risk on India. But whether they actually reap the rewards in the long run is we'll see.
Because then there is also that case that in India you have governments changing every 5 years, and as much as they would hope for Narendra Modi to be the prime minister, as so would I, for the next 5 years after 2019. Who knows what might happen in India. So I don't know if that's weighing on the company's mind as well, that the continuity in the government policy.
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, again, governments rarely say no to a good thing.
Of course, yeah, no. But this is just maybe this is the skeptic talking. So I don't know. But Pramod, you wanted to weigh in?
I just wanted to take this discussion forward. I know we're already about 40 minutes into this discussion.
Yeah.
Great discussion. Thank you, Dhruv, for sharing your insights. On the encryption snafu, what happened? Did they get spooked by Snowden?
He's on Twitter, by the way. Just for people who don't know.
Snowden just joined Twitter today.
Snowden just tweeted, and he the only account that he follows is, I think, the NSA. So, which is, I think, the best way of trolling. So,
that's funny.
I don't know enough about the specifics of the encryption thing, but in my understanding is that it came from a very low level. It came out of the bureaucracy. It was not fully thought through. The minister says that he had no knowledge of this. I mean, I don't know if that's correct. But I mean, honestly, there needs to be more of a public debate about this. Every time I've tried to raise this, I was on NDTV 2 years ago, trying to raise some of these issues. At the very least, say this is important, and nobody was interested in that at the time. I mean, I think we just need greater awareness of this in India a little bit.
Yeah, that was with the BlackBerry thing, right? A couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was after that.
Get access to that, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think, long story short, I do see a lot of good sparks in what his intentions are. It's too early. 16 months is too early for us to go in and ask anybody anything specific, considering the 10 years prior to that have been abysmal. Anything that has to start from really from the ground level, we might have to give him some more time, maybe another 7 or 8 months before he completes his 2 years to see and understand progress. One of the things also I want to veer our discussions is little bit back to foreign policy. And one of the often, the biggest statistics that is given is that Indian Foreign Service is understaffed, and they don't really have anything to do with they're not an extension of your trade and economic policy. And you kind of, I think a couple of days ago mentioned that there should be a trade representative in the Commerce Ministry per se. So, what is this? Is this a intense rivalry between Minister of External Affairs and Commerce Ministry as to, who's going to talk trade and who's going to talk politics versus visa?
Now you
What
sound
is-
like Jagdish Bhagwati, Pramod. So I hope you're not as skeptical as Jagdish Bhagwati sounded.
No,
But then again,
no.
but then again, he's skeptical about everything but himself. So
I just want Dhruv to talk about that.
Yeah. So in terms of IFS capacity, I mean, I think that's a well-known issue that they, I mean, you do have a MEA that's overstretched in many ways, and again, the people always say it's comparable in size to Foreign Ministry of Singapore, for example. And how can you do that? Now, I mean, one is things are changing slowly. So the intake has now doubled in the last few years. In fact, I mean, if you look, India now recruits twice the number of diplomats that Britain does. I mean, it's still very small, but it's growing. You've seen recent steps for the first time for the MEA to actually hire outside consultants on a formal basis. So they have it's still on a very small scale, but hopefully it'll be expanded. Three, I think, a number of other issues. Increasingly, you have other ministries dealing with foreign affairs. I mean, it's falling to them. So almost every ministry now there's an international dimension. So actually expanding their capacity and ability to work with MEA rather than expanding the IFS cadre per se may be another solution to some of these
almost
issues.
like an interministerial bureaucracy, something like that.
No. What I'm confused through, and I want you to kind of give us a little bit of more insight on that is, what I get confused is there are state-level chief ministers, state-level commerce ministers, state-level finance ministers that undertake a trip, let's say, to China, South Korea, or one of these other countries. Who's doing the follow-up? Who is maneuvering the myriad intricacies of a federal-level commerce delegation versus a state-level? Is that part of the paralysis that you're seeing?
Something's falling between the gaps between state and the center. I mean, on some issues, but I think on other issues where the state is taking the lead or where a specific ministry is taking the lead, I think you do have follow-up there. I mean, on the capacity issue, actually, the thing that concerns me more is the IAS. Actually, I mean, India can't be run by 4,000 bureaucrats anymore. I mean, that was the size. I mean, this is a 1960s size government, and even though India's interests have grown, and the needs have grown in many ways, and capabilities have grown. You don't. I mean, the IAS, in fact, may be just as much in need of reform and sort of a rethink as to how it operates and functions. I mean, everything from recruitment to everything else to structures. So having more specialization. For example, I mean, one of the things that's talked about is Ministry of Defense having more specialization, or even Ministry of Commerce for that matter. Right now, you have generalists who move from one ministry to another, and all of them are very capable people, obviously. I mean, getting into the IAS is still a very difficult thing, and these people have to undergo a lot of training. But having more specialized cadre, I mean, in some ways, the IFS has been a little bit, because it is specialized, it's been a little immune to some of those problems.
So you're saying more technocrats and less bureaucrats, maybe, or include?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder actually if the question is whether we can have more bureaucrats in India but less bureaucry. I mean, that's the big thing.
Excellent point.
We actually, actually, the article I wrote for Foreign Policy, the editors titled it India's bloated bureaucracy problem, and I was rather upset by that because my thing is India, we don't have a bloated bureaucracy. Our bureaucracy is too small. We actually need to grow it.
Probably it should have been Indian bureaucracy's bloated problem.
maybe.
So,
maybe.
But that was a mind maker spin on that. But before we get to the last part, and I wanted to wrap up this discussion, I would like to tell all the viewers, if you have any comments, please tweet to us at MYINDMAKERS, or you can even post it to our Facebook page. Please like us on Facebook, or you can email it to us at info@mind.net. But the last question, and kind of a nice way to end on this, was the Prime Minister told a very interesting thing in UN, was define terrorism. And that to me was a very, very significant point, because we were joking on the podcast, me and Pramod, that, and I think Prasunanda weighed in with this, that the UN's original mission was to stop wars. After the Iraq war, we knew that it was to stop certain wars. But so when it comes to terrorism also, do we also see a certain ambiguity in the UN's definition of terrorism?
Well, yes. I mean, but then again, I wouldn't put too much stock in the UN on this. I mean, I think there's a larger issue of
I think he was making a larger point at certain countries rather than UN itself.
Yes, of course. Yes. No, it was a nice way of making a particular point, but no, I mean, it's a larger issue. I mean, I think in some ways the rise of ISIS has maybe put a greater international focus on it than we've seen in a little while. I think there's a little bit of disillusionment, and in fact, I mean, I think we've seen some bad news come out of Afghanistan just in the last day or two in the fall of Kunduz. But whether that actually leads to greater Taliban gains in other areas, we'll have to see. But I mean, this is a larger problem, and I mean, I would say, going back, this is one of the top priorities for this government in how to effectively contain the terrorist threat. I mean, I think so that, and along with balancing China, economic diplomacy, and regional integration would be really the big priorities for this government. But there are no easy answers, unfortunately. I mean, nobody's managed to solve this problem.
Absolutely, but I thought it was interesting that he raised it. But coming to Pramod, yes.
I just wanted to ask Dhruv a final fun question. Dhruv.
Okay, fun question.
Trump or Hillary? Does it matter for India, or is it going to be the same?
No, I think it does matter to some degree. I don't, I like talking about this precisely because I have zero stake in this in the U.S. political process, and
all of us.
Well, I mean, the organization I work for also happens to be a nice balance of Republicans and Democrats. So it's perfectly fine. I can say whatever I want. I mean, one of the things is I think Hillary is a known quantity for many in India. I think she's been around long enough, and she's had enough interaction with India over the years. First as First Lady, then as Senator, where she was the head of the India Caucus, then as Secretary of State. So that I think people know where she stands, at least on India. So at least I think she's a safe bet if that's one way of looking at it. I think on the Republican side, a few people, I think there wouldn't be a problem. I imagine a Jeb Bush or another centrist mainstream establishment Republican would actually pursue very similar policies to the Bush administration. So again, I don't see a problem. It's I think the wild cards are really, again, a Trump where you have no foreign policy per se.
You have no policy.
Although what's interesting though is, I mean, some of the things he says, while they sound kind of crazy and crude, actually seem to cut at the heart of problems a little bit more than some of the more wonky candidates. So some of the things he said about Pakistan, for example, are slightly wacky and crazy, but he seemed to instinctively grasp the problem in a way that I think a lot of people who are in fact much more knowledgeable tend to tie themselves up into knots over. So I mean, it's interesting to see how somebody like him thinks about
maybe Trump met the script writers of the show Homeland about what they thought about.
I mean, that may in fact where season 4 of Homeland may be where he derived his inspiration for those remarks. I don't know.
He took the CIA's director's remark, which I'm not going to repeat on the Hangout, but everybody knows what it is. Too seriously on that. But on a lighter note, that's as much discussion as we want about Pakistan on this Hangout, and that's what it should be. I think India has been one thing what Narendra Modi's trips have done, and all. It is kind of leading up to it. India has been elevated to a different playing field when it comes to a global stage. It's not just seen as a counterweight to Pakistan. Yeah. And that's how it should be, Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. I think so. On each of the issues that I mentioned, so I mean, there is a Pakistan role, but regional connectivity. We're seeing effectively, an emphasis with Nepal. I mean, until the latest constitutional crisis, but certainly with Bangladesh, it's going positively. With Sri Lanka, it's going positively. With Myanmar, it may go positively. We'll have to see. But basically, we're seeing effectively an India-centered regional connectivity in South and Southeast Asia starting to take shape. And I think what's been indicated is the door is always open to Pakistan, as long as they're willing to abide by a certain set of norms. And so far, they've shown that they have no interest in that. So
right, and then you also have the dichotomy of whom you talk to: Pakistan, the military or the establishment. Does the establishment have to ring up GHQ whenever they talk to India? So that's there. But with that, I think that's sorry, Dhruv, you were making a point on that.
Pramod? No,
Yeah,
not
no,
me, but maybe Pramod.
I was just going to say that it's just been probably 15 to 20 years in the making that the United States does realize that hyphenating India and Pakistan is not really something that Indians would really appreciate, in the sense of calling it an ally. The terminologies have changed. They're now calling it a friendship or a partnership. So even those coinage of terms has changed quite drastically. Plus, I keep saying that the biggest strength India right now has it, though, that 1% of the people of Indian origin now living and being part of American life. That leverage can be immensely important moving forward.
And you can see that this establishment, especially Narendra Modi, is using that leverage quite significantly, whether you see the outreach or those events in Madison Square Garden or the SAP Center. But, and on a lighter note, when you said about Hillary, I think the first term of Bill Clinton saw Robin Raphael in advising the US government. I don't think we are likely to see another Robin Raphael in...
Yeah, I mean, it's actually interesting to see in some ways. No, I mean, perhaps not. But it's actually interesting to just also to see the evolution of Indian Americans into the politics. And I mean, politics is one thing, but into the policy world. I mean, I don't think it would have been imaginable even 10, 15 years ago that you'd have the U.S. ambassador to India, the Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia, would be of Indian origin, and there was a certain reticence. I mean, I noticed this amongst slightly earlier generation of Indian Americans who, even when they did go into the policy world, they actually wanted to keep away from India, and I think they were concerned that they might be seen as too favorable, I think there are no such hang-ups anymore. People, they represent the U.S. government, and it's a friendly relationship.
And it was so unique that for certain people, certain politicians, that last year we had the hilarious episode where a guy from Florida actually thought that they were representing the Indian government. So if anyone hasn't checked out that clip, do check out John Oliver's statement.
It's quite funny, yes.
But on that lighter note, I guess we want to thank Dhruv for joining us on this hangout.
Thank you for having me.
It's been excellent chatting to you, and we're not going to let go of you so soon. So we hope to have certain engagements like that in the future on Mindmakers, and we would be very interesting to know the findings of your study with the India-Japan relationship.
Yes, that's next year, so I'll discuss that next year.
And then what we were discussing offline. It's been we met Dhruv about last year when he was in Houston on an event for Narendra Modi in America the first time. So it's kind of good that a year later we are analyzing. It's kind of the pre-event and post-event kind of deal.
Yes.
So anyways, once again, thank you everyone for joining in, and we'll be back soon with another edition of Mind Debates. Till now, from me, from Pramod and Adit, it's goodbye.